Hello and welcome to the March or Die show today. Glad to have you joining me. This is the show where every single episode I do my best, and I don't always meet the mark, but I do my best to give you the principles and perspectives you need to march, that is to move forward when it would be easier to stay where you are and die. We talk about what each of those words mean, but often in life there are opportunities to stay where we are. We're not moving forward. We're not making progress. And so although we may be breathing, we are emotionally and spiritually and relationally dead. We're stuck. But the better decision in those moments is to march. And we talk about that on this show every single week. And this week is no exception. I'm excited about the episode today. What a wonderful conversation I had with my guest, Leslie, and just using her first name. And we talk about that a little bit in the show as we walk through this. But Leslie runs a Life-Affirming pregnancy medical clinic, and she talks about what that is and the work that they do. And she's been involved in this work for a long time. So we talk about abortion. We just had an episode on this topic. And again, I thought that was a fantastic conversation and very insightful, very helpful conversation. But what Leslie is involved in is kind of the other side of that. When someone is to the point where they're thinking about ending a pregnancy, when they're trying to make these decisions and navigate this. In last episode, when we talked about this, we talked about discipleship and teaching and training and all of the tools that we need to use to help people think biblically about this issue. But what if someone's gone too far down the road? They're now at the point where they're at a crisis moment. They're in a crisis personally. They're trying to make the right decisions, trying to make a decision, even though they may not know what that right decision is. Where do they go? And we talk about that today. And then we talk more broadly about how to help folks who are just in crisis. We know that there are crises that all of us deal with, all of us face, and really trying to help navigate those, regardless of how we got to where we are. How do we move forward? Wonderful conversation. Very grateful for the opportunity to have this and share it with you. I believe this will be an episode you'll want to share with others. I know that you'll appreciate this, my conversation with Leslie. Leslie, thank you for joining me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
We've already had several wonderful conversations, have not recorded one yet, and so I'm excited to be able to record some of this and share it. Where to start is kind of the thing I've been grappling with. So let's start with this. Why don't you share your story as much of it as you'd like to share, and kind of run up to the work that you do now and the world that really that you're very involved in right now.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. So, yeah, I think most people that come into any kind of movement, or especially coming alongside broken people, have come from brokenness themselves. And I absolutely do. I grew up in some really difficult circumstances. A lot of dysfunction, a lot of abuse in all manners. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse as a child. And out of that, I reacted as most people do when they come out of that. And I have a history of abusing myself through drugs and alcohol and the relationships that come with that also. And mostly it was because I had no value. I didn't even know that I could have value. I didn't know because at a very young age, somebody took that value from me. And so I thought that my only value came from what I could give somebody. And usually that was me physically. And so, growing up through my teen years and really trying to numb all of that pain that was inside of me through drugs and alcohol. And I so desperately wanted to get out of that, but I honestly could not figure out how. I didn't know how to get out of this cycle of drugs and alcohol and relationships and all of this. And when I was in my mid-20s, I met somebody that I thought looked perfect, and but I didn't have any values. So what does that perfect look like?
Right, right.
And it turns out that he had a very twisted view on what relationships were and how to treat women. And so I'm a survivor of domestic violence.
Mm.
When I found out that I was pregnant with his child, he told me to abort that child. And I didn't. And the relationship became more violent. He left when I was 6 months pregnant. Um, and I've seen him twice since in court trying to get child support. My
Wow.
son was born, and the day after he was born, they walked in and they said, "Your son has a very complex heart defect."
Mm.
My son had, by the time he was 14, 4 open heart surgeries, over 40 hospitalizations, a brain surgery, and my life became very, very difficult. I always equate to the rich young ruler. I had a very good job. I drove a very nice car, and with a year, I had lost everything. Um, his father left me about $10,000 in debt. Um, we were so poor that sometimes I would not be able to eat on a regular basis so that my son could eat on a regular basis. And as my life got so difficult, and I wasn't raised in a Christian home, I knew who God was. I knew for a fact he didn't want to have anything to do with me,
Yeah.
for all the
Yeah.
things that I had done. And my sister invited me to a church to go hear these people speak, and I did not want to go because I didn't want to have anything to do with church. And I went and I heard the speaker say that my idea of hell is not eternal damnation, it's knowing that God called, and I never answered. And in that moment, I saw all the times that I had held up my hand and God had called me and saved me from some pretty dire circumstances. And I
Mm.
said, no, thank you. I've
Yeah.
got partying to do. I've got a life to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and really what it was is I had so much pain crushed down inside of me. I really thought if I came to the Lord, all that pain would come out and I would utterly lose my mind. I really thought I would start screaming and I would never stop. Um, I would love to tell you that that day, it was in March of 1998 that I got saved, but I started going to that church. Um, and it's an amazing thing when you've lived a life, you see life on other people's faces. And at this church, I saw in these people's faces a similar life than that I had lived. And so in August of 1998, the person who became my very first senior pastor, I was 30 years old at the time, said, "If you deny me before man, I'll deny you before God." And I thought, that's all I have. All the times I denied God, and that's all I have to do. So I went up. I think I ran up, maybe crying, and accepted the Lord. And my life didn't get easier at that point. I was still a single mom, very poor, with a very sick child.
Yeah.
He was 3 at the time, but I had hope. And I had a daddy for a little girl who didn't have that. I had a daddy. I had a husband. I had, I just had this peace that passes all understanding. And the
Yeah.
amazing thing is, as I've told that story over the years, the amazing thing is that God held his hand over all of that pain and all of those scars, and he healed it.
Yeah.
And I never felt any of it. My son is 29 now. And it's that whole story of God hid his heart defect because they did ultrasound in utero because they didn't know that I was in the midst of domestic violence.
Yep.
And I kept going into preterm labor. And I truly believe that God hid that defect because what decision, I'm not a believer at that time, what decision would I have made at that moment?
Can I can
If
I
I
ask
had,
can I ask you
sure.
about that specifically? Because I was thinking about that when you said your son's father wanted you to abort and you decided not to, but you're also living at a time where you didn't have a value system to make that decision specifically.
Yeah.
So even without the knowledge of his heart defect, why did you make the decision, or what was in you that caused you to make the decision to deal with his father and all the fallout of that and still have your son?
Um, I think it was something that I knew I would not survive emotionally. I
Interesting.
am, I think that there was just something in me that said, I won't survive this.
Yep.
And it was something about knowing that I was carrying this child that became most important
Yeah.
to me, to actually come up against him and say, no, I'm not doing this. I think now I know that it was God just
Right.
saying, you can't
Right.
do this. You
Right.
can't do this. But had I known, and trust me, it wasn't like, no, I wasn't even strong enough. It's just,
Mm.
it was innately, but there were times, let me tell you, there were times in that before he left that I would say, maybe I should,
Yeah.
maybe. And I remember my sister saying, don't do what I know you think you're going to do. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And I was living far away from her at the time. And I think her speaking that into me and just, I think tapping into that strength that had allowed me to survive everything that I had
Yep.
survived up to
Yep.
that point, and just that I can't do this, and that's the only thing I wish I could tell you it was me. Now I know
Yeah.
it was a God that I
Yeah.
didn't
That's
even
good.
know speaking into me. So, but I truly believe that God,
That's good.
because my son was not given to me for what I could do for my son. My son was given to me so that because that's the one thing that saved my life, because that is the only person that this stiff-necked Israelite
Hmm.
would hit their knees and submit to God. Something I tell people this all the time, with addictions and everything, is something has to become more important than that.
That's good.
And more important was my son. So fast forward to today,
That's good.
is I actually run a life-affirming pregnancy medical clinic. And the funny thing is when you come from brokenness, you see brokenness on other people. And I innately know a lot of times the women who are walking through our doors, that lack of value and that lack of, I'm not worth anything. I can't do this. All of the things. If you've walked down that road, you absolutely know that road. And it's a thing of, hey, I've walked down this road.
Yep.
We're going to walk with you because we know the other side. And so, yeah, that's kind of the last 29 years.
Yeah. That's
And
crazy.
before then.
Um, you talked about why you didn't respond to God initially was because of the pain that you were carrying, and you were, afraid that it would all come out. And it's fascinating to me how people who have dealt with, deep trauma and deep hurt, there's a weird, it's almost comfort that comes to them from holding on to that. So I would rather hold on to the pain and all that I'm dealing with than step into the unknown of releasing it. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I've had that conversation with so many people, and to me on the outside, it just seems so obvious, right? Like,
Mhm.
hey, let's get rid of this thing. Let's get rid of this pain. Let's get rid of this hurt. Why would you not want to? And it almost seems absurd to want to hang on to that, but that's a very real response for a lot of people, is hanging on to that pain.
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's so funny. I do have that conversation often. Because if you've grown up in pain and you've
Yep.
only ever known pain your whole life, you know how to manage. I knew how to manage chaos. I knew how to um, check for body
Yeah. Yeah.
language and
Yeah.
tone of voice. You know how to survive that. I didn't know how to live in a functional world as a functional person. That was scary. This I could manage because I'd been managing it for a long time. That was, like you said, it was such an unknown
Yeah.
that I was comfortable here in alcohol and drugs and abuse and all that because that's exactly what I knew. And so that's where I was comfortable. And what God
Yeah.
does is he starts making that uncomfortable for you. It doesn't, there's no comfort. You literally come to the end of yourself. And when you have no place else but to look but up because you've lost everything and this doesn't satisfy anymore. And, rehab, and I've known a lot of people that have gone through rehab. It has to be a rehab in here. Like I said, that drug, that alcohol, that porn, that whatever,
Yeah.
that relationships, it has to, I think that God almost makes it like ash in your mouth. It doesn't
Mm.
feel good anymore. And so I was willing to do anything to not feel like this, but also it has to take something again that's more important. And my
Right.
son
Right.
to me was
Right.
more important. And I did not want him to grow up like I had grown up. I did not want him to grow up and be an abuser. And so there had to be something better than what I knew.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. It's so interesting to watch people walk through those things, because what seems to make sense, this is the logical next step, for the person who's in the middle of that pain and that trauma, that brokenness, the hurt, the addiction, whatever. It's not necessarily the logical next step, and I think it's important for people to understand. The work that we do with veterans and folks who are struggling with post-traumatic stress and combat trauma, those issues, but specifically kind of the far end of that spectrum where they're talking about suicide and self-harm and those kind of things. It's easy, and I used to be this way 20 years ago, right? Where I'd look at people who did those things to themselves and think, that's the coward's way out or whatever, all this stuff we say, right? But when you're in the middle of that, it's the most logical thing in the world. It's wrong. It's diluted. It's all of those things. But to you, it's the most logical thing in the world to do what you're doing, because all that stuff's piled on top of you, and that's important for people that are trying to help others, I think, to understand.
Well, and I even say that in what we deal with here is to somebody in a crisis.
Yeah.
They're thinking in a circular thought process. They're actually not thinking in a linear thought process. And that's absolutely where we want to get her, is thinking in a linear thought process.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a circular thought process, you're going to jump from A to Z without thinking what's after that. And it's even if she's considering abortion as an option, she is in so much of a crisis. And I know it is a twisted theology. It makes sense to her.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Oftentimes we will hear, because we're going to go over all her options. She has three. She can parent, she can place for adoption, or she can abort. And we're going to talk through each one of those things and what does that look like now and what does that look like in the future, because you want her on that linear thought process. And sometimes, if we bring up adoption, she'll say to us, I can't do that because I can't know that my baby's out there, so I have to abort. Well, that doesn't make sense when you're not in a crisis, but it makes absolute sense to her at that moment. That's why the difference between organizations like ours and people who profit from a crisis, they absolutely want her making a decision in a crisis. Good decisions are not made in a crisis. What is that old saying from back in my BC days? No good decision is made at 2 a.m.
Right.
So,
yes. Nothing good happens after midnight, I think, is the advice I used to get.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Right. So, and so it is that whole process of being in a crisis that and you know this, that front part of your brain where decision making is made actually shuts down.
Yep.
And you're in the emotional part of your brain, the logical, the frontal lobe. That's why I always say that that's why 18-year-olds make great Marines,
Right.
because the
That's
frontal
exactly right.
lobe
Yep.
hasn't developed yet. It
That's
doesn't
right.
develop till 25. So that decision, I always say too, why 15-year-old boys think it's a great idea to jump off the roof, because the cause and effect
Yeah.
hasn't set in
Yeah.
yet. Well, it's the same thing in a crisis. That part of their brain actually shuts down. They can't make a decision and should not make a decision in that moment. So, and I think when you've lived in a crisis, getting back to the other is, I couldn't even make a good decision. I actually didn't even know how to make good. I knew in my heart that I was made better for this.
Yeah.
I knew in my heart that I didn't deserve, like, I just so wanted respect,
Yeah.
and I didn't know how to get it. But what I needed to find out is that I needed to respect myself first. And I talk about that often when I speak to youth. You know what? I walk under a crown that my daddy put upon my head, and I rock that crown, and I demand respect. I treat people with respect, and I expect respect back. And then that has to come where I know I deserve this, but to get this, I better start being respecting myself and
Mhm.
making better decisions.
That's good. So when someone in crisis, when a young lady in crisis walks into your facility,
Hmm.
you have the opportunity to sit them down to go through those three options. You have a goal, right? Somewhere
Hmm.
you're trying to steer them to. How
Hmm.
do you break that circular reasoning, that thinking that they're involved in, that crisis moment? How do you communicate to them that there are other, and I would argue, you would argue, I'm sure, better options than terminating a pregnancy? How do you do that? How do you get
Yeah.
through that?
Yeah. We listen. We listen to her. We value her enough to tell her story and what is going on. What are her pressures, internal, external?
Yeah.
What real or in her head? And then we'll talk her out. My parents are going to kill me. Okay, do your parents love you? Well, yes. Have they ever not loved you? No. Okay, so do you think that maybe they'd be upset, and they might be upset because
Sure.
they don't want your life to be harder,
Sure.
but have they ever given you into any indication that they would want to do you harm? And let them think on that. Well, no, my parents do love me.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it is just that, slowing down that crisis, allowing them to speak their fears, not judging them in their fears, allowing them to voice those, because sometimes when we speak things out loud, it sounds better than the giant we've created in our head. And so, yes, we're going to walk her through that. We're going to ask what is going on in her life. Is she being abused? Is, and it could be, I always talk about this, the women that come through our clinic is, she's 16 and nobody ever told her that she could say no. She's 20 and the guy that said he loved her, all of a sudden that love looks very different when that pregnancy test came up
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah.
She's married, and this baby came awfully quickly after the last baby, and they're barely making it, and she
Mhm.
doesn't know what they're gonna do. She's married, and she just found out that he's done with the marriage and he's moved on with somebody else, but he forgot to tell her. All of these scenarios, and so we're going to listen to each one of those scenarios and allow her to speak her hurt and her fears and what is causing her to feel like she needs to end the life of her child. Because women are you and I were talking earlier that men are created to provide and protect. Women are created to nurture and grow.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say that word. It's against how we're made,
Right.
to end the lives of our children. That's not how women were made. There has to be an external pressure that's going on that's making making her think about this decision. And I will tell you that most of the women that we see feel backed into a corner.
Yeah.
And and women by nature are pleasers. We want to make everybody's life better. We want to make everybody happy. You guys see the hill, charge the hill. We want
Mm.
to make everything better.
Right.
And in her view, she doesn't want to disappoint her family. She doesn't want to disappoint her boyfriend. She doesn't want to disappoint his family. She's the first person to graduate from high school, college, whatever.
Mm.
She's just started her career, and she needs to make this better. And she will do something that she absolutely knows will destroy her, because trust me when I tell you, she knows that, to make everything better, because she feels that she's done this. It's her fault. So in listening to her and allowing her to speak those fears, and then a lot of times it's because there are medical reasons why she needs to have an ultrasound no matter what her decision is. She needs a pregnancy test is only going to tell us what it's going to tell us. But that ultrasound tells us if that pregnancy is viable, meaning is there a heartbeat? Because if there's no viability, there's no reason for her to abort. And just so people know who may be kind of squishy on this issue, the human heart starts beating 22 days after conception. A woman generally finds out she's pregnant 30 to 35 days after conception. So by the time that she finds out that she's pregnant, that heart's been beating for about 15 days.
Wow.
When we can pick
Wow.
it up on ultrasound is 6 weeks. A good sonographer sometimes can pick it up 5 weeks and 8 days, but really to get that strong heartbeat is 6 weeks. So she needs to know that. She needs to know if that pregnancy is placed in her uterus or not, because if it's outside of her uterus, that's a medical emergency, and that's something that we need to have looked at right away. And how far along she is, because that's a lot in her decision making. I cannot tell you in the 13 years that I've been in this movement, all the women who came in and thought that they were 10 weeks pregnant and they're actually 25 weeks pregnant.
Wow. Wow.
And that looks very, very different. The mind is an amazing thing, and how much we can deny. And so, so we'll have them have that ultrasound. And again, it's putting them on that linear thought process. And people who oppose us say that we just use ultrasound as coercion. It's actually medically necessary. And it's not in the best interest of a woman to proceed with abortion if she does not know those three things.
Yeah.
But yes, we are like, figure she's going down a river on a raft, and there's rapids and there's rocks and there's logs, and those are all the things that she is afraid of, and we slowly take those out of her way. And then the river becomes straight and it's calm, because now she's in a calm thought process and she can think differently, because a lot of the stressors or the things that she's putting and thinking are a barrier to having this child actually really aren't.
Yep.
They can be handled by another agency, or or we partner with a lot of organizations that come alongside to lighten some of that burden.
How does someone end up at a facility like yours if the thought of abortion is in their mind? How they end up at a facility like yours instead of an abortion clinic? What I would imagine you get a different type of person walking in to see you.
Yes. Well, a lot of times it's in our marketing and our search engine optimizations, and
Sure.
but realistically, the services that we in almost all medical clinics, pro-life clinics, our pregnancy tests and our ultrasounds are free.
Yeah.
No matter what her decision is. At an abortion provider, and I do know this because I did medical billing prior to coming here, not for an abortion facility, but for a medical clinic. I know how they bundle these things up.
Yeah.
If she is undecided about her pregnancy, that ultrasound at an abortion provider is $500. If she's undecided about her pregnancy when she walks in our doors, that
Yep.
ultrasound is free.
Yep.
If she's happy to parent, that ultrasound is free. If she is set on having an abortion, but she just needs this information from us, that ultrasound is free. So that a lot of reasons, a lot of times she'll end up with us because of word of mouth. I'm kind of a data geek.
Yeah.
But I love comparing data. Where do they come from? Well, a lot of times they come to us through Google, but Google and word of mouth are almost neck and neck. So people are referring
That's good.
them to us. And the funny thing is there is an abortion provider very close in proximity to us. And they will often send their patients over because we do free ultrasounds. They
Oh,
know
nice.
that we do free. I hope that they know
Interesting.
it's never going to be reciprocal,
Right.
and I just always think it's a God thing. I
Yeah.
just think it's a God thing when they come walking through the doors. And let me tell you that every woman that walks through our doors for us is a divine appointment.
Yeah.
And I look at it like this. I heard this from somebody else. When the woman was thrown at Jesus' feet, he stood in front of her and he protected her first. He dealt with her accusers, and then he turned around and he dealt with her humanity, but he did it with love.
Yeah.
When the woman he met at the well, and trust me, I relate to her very, very well, he sat and he talked to her. He did not throw her sin in her face. He talked to her and brought up her lifestyle, but he did it with so much gentleness and love that the woman at the well went and told the whole village
Yeah.
about him, and that whole village got saved. It's how we approach her, and when you were asking earlier, is how do we guide and direct her, is we treat her with respect. We
Yeah.
treat her with dignity. We treat her with love. And she doesn't even know that she deserves any of those things. And here these people are just loving her.
That's good. Man, there are a lot of lot of questions, but I'll go with this one. Let's try to broaden it out a little bit. You've spent, your life either dealing with your own, crisis moments and trauma and all of those things, or invested in helping others do that. Trauma, crisis, brokenness, hurt. That's not simply the arena of those who are dealing with an unplanned pregnancy, although that's where you spend the majority of your focus. But what have you learned over the course of your life dealing with these things personally and helping others and walking through this? I would imagine hundreds of times, maybe more. What have you learned that you would want to communicate to someone who's in a crisis, either because of marriage or because of abuse or whatever? I mean, we're living at the most upside down time maybe in American history. I'm sure we are. We're all in crisis to some degree, right? But some are in very real personal crisis.
Mm-hmm.
What would you want to communicate to that person from your lived experience and then just your observational and outside helping other people experience? What do I need to know? I'm in a crisis. What do I need to know that you wish I knew? And a lot of people, maybe they don't. Maybe they just don't have hope.
Mm-hmm. I think that the biggest thing, and we all go through crisis. I was just talking to a very dear friend a couple hours ago, and those tapes that go in our head, and I was
Yeah.
saying, talking about different directions to go in this movement. And I said, but the voice in my head is always saying, you're not good enough. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. And you have to silence that enemy in your, because then he wins. And I think if somebody, because I've sat across so many people, is you are not alone. You are made for a purpose. And what was done to you was horrible. And the things that you have done to yourself, you need to let go and let people come and help you, because there are good people out there that see the value in you. You were created for a purpose by a mighty God who loves you. He has He is just waiting to welcome you home. He is waiting to take you in his arms, and he will not shame you, and he will not leave you, because when he would have left you or could have left you was at the cross. And
Mm,
if he didn't do it then,
that's
he's
good.
not going to do it now. And his desire is for you. Your sin is forgiven there, all of it, all of it. And his desire is for you to walk in the victory of the empty tomb. And there are good people out there that will walk alongside you. You are not alone, especially abuse. People who have been abused have been isolated by their abuser.
Yeah.
And then they've isolated themselves because of shame. And that is the very worst thing that we can do. And there are people out there who are willing and able to come alongside and hear you and value you, and not throw your shame, your sin into your face. And nobody deserves to walk in shame. Just as a side note, where we have a lot of homeless people, and there's a one tortured soul that walks by all the time. And every time I hear him, I actually one day thought he was having an argument with somebody, because it sounded like two different voices, and
Yeah.
it was actually just him.
Mm,
And every time I see him, I just stand and I pray for him, because he is a child of God. He is created in God's image, and
yeah.
he is a son. He is a brother. Somebody at some point loved him, but something went horribly wrong. And so just praying that God would set him free from this torment, and just telling people in a very practical way, because sometimes I think as Christians we want to lead with the gospel,
Sure.
and sometimes you just have to sit in people's dirt. You have to sit under their tree. It's missionary 101. You have to
Yeah.
sit in their culture and hear them, and let God's going to reveal himself. We don't need to take the lead on that. God's going to give us the words on that. But I think the biggest thing is people who are dealing with trauma, and you and I spoke earlier. I've seen PTSD because my stepson is a combat vet,
Yep.
and I've seen what it can do to a person. Um, is is that you People in trauma have so much shame, and we need to break through the shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
That's
think
good.
that that's the biggest thing is I am if I'm sitting across from you, is looking at you and saying, I see you, and I hear you. And I may not have experienced what you've experienced, but I'm here and I'm ready to listen.
That's good. Yeah. That's
We
good.
recently had a young woman come in, and it was a very complicated story. The basis of the story is she's pregnant, but she comes from a different culture that this could be very bad for her. And she was so upset about telling her parents that she was actually hyperventilating in the clinic. And my clinic director and I had to do some box breathing and measured breathing exercises with her to get her to slow down so that we could actually speak to her. But the biggest thing I told her is, honey, I'm not of your culture, but I do know quite a bit about your culture, and I've been around your culture. I understand what you're up against. I really do. And I understand your fear. And you could see her whole countenance, because somebody understood where she was.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
And I think that that's the biggest thing when we're dealing with people, um, especially in the abortion issue, because it evokes deep emotion in
Yep.
people,
Man,
and we have to be careful.
that's so good. It's kind of the human condition is to suffer, and we suffer differently, but none of us get out of this thing without struggle. And again, I would never minimize someone's pain. People go through just incredibly difficult, and it's amazing the situations people live through and walk through, and some even put on a happy face while they're just broken inside, right? And so
Hmm.
we know that, but I think specifically to what you deal with every day, the abortion issue, it touches so many areas of life. The individual, certainly the child, but as you've talked about, the families and society's culture. I mean, it touches everything. Where can people go? What would you point them to if someone is trying to either understand the issue better, they're looking for help, uh, someone's hearing what we're talking about, and we've been specifically vague about where you are, but where can people um, kind of run this down if they're looking for help or just trying to understand, or even if they're trying to help someone else that they know that's going through something like this?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and we can touch on the specifically vague just a little bit. We are specifically vague because after Roe was overturned, clinics were bombed,
Yeah,
and my number one job is to protect my team and
sure.
to protect the patients. God has placed me in a position to shepherd people, and I take that very seriously. And
Yeah,
so, it's I have to be strategic now in how I present myself, because it's not just me. I have other people that I have to
right,
protect.
right.
But I think the biggest thing is there's a lot of parts to the pro-life movement. Um, you and I were just talking about the justice side and the mercy side. The justice side are the activists, and they do great work and policy and all of that. And the mercy side, pregnancy medical clinics and pregnancy resource centers, which are two completely different things. I run a medical clinic. We're a licensed, accredited clinic. And resource centers are resource centers, both valuable in this movement. They sit on the mercy side.
Mm,
They sit on they're the care side. They're
yeah,
the face to face, knee to knee, hearing her story. So I think if people want to understand this issue and absolutely understand the abortion minded woman, and her humanity and her struggle, and this is not a she should just issue. It's her story is complex, it's uniquely hers. It should be valued. It should be heard. I don't care how she got here and what she did. I care about her in front of me. And again, Jesus didn't throw people's sin in their face, and so we're not going to do that either. And so I think if people are looking or know somebody that's pregnant, is call your local pregnancy medical clinic or your PRC. Ask if you can meet with them. Ask if you can meet with the director. All of us are happy. I'm always happy to sit down, give a tour, and talk with people and kind of hash out this. It is a divisive issue.
right.
I think it's an issue a lot of times in Christianity that's so divisive because a lot of people, there's a lot of reasons. One is there are certain things that some people can't understand because they would never do it. And so it seems like the worst sin.
Mm,
And then there's other people who have abortion in their past and they feel like it's the worst sin. And it's not. God doesn't grade on a curve. All sin is equal at the foot of the cross, and his blood covered all of it. So I think that people have a lot of questions in how to reach women, how to talk about this. And your clinic, your directors and your staff are your greatest resource because they are in the trench of it. They are at ground level of it, in that battle every single day. The justice side absolutely has a place and a purpose, and
right.
they do the things that we can't do. But I think for to understanding the humanity of this issue, I think if you were to get a hold of your local clinic and make an appointment, but I would say this: go in with an open mind that maybe your thoughts on this might change than what you're thinking. Maybe some preconceived ideas about her or how that clinic runs might
Yeah,
change, because it's probably different than what you think.
yeah,
If somebody who knows somebody that needs their services, and they're going to provide them good care. Because in the end of the day, yes, they want a baby saved, but they want a mom loved. That's at the end of the day. If you love that mom and you care for that mom and you support that mom, chances are then she'll be able to love, support, and care for that baby. She's not even meeting her own needs.
Right.
And she's thinking, how am I going to meet this baby's needs?
Right.
So we come alongside and help in that and be that support network, then she is able to, okay, I actually can do this. So it's kind of different than sometimes people think.
Well, it's important you make the distinction, and it's a very important distinction. There are two kind of different lanes, right? In the world I live in with veterans and service members, first responders, we break it into what we call resiliency and recovery. These are two completely different things, but aimed at the same target. It'd be much better to, on the resiliency side, keep people out of trouble, keep people from making bad decisions, keep people from falling into addiction and destroying their marriages and all of the things that we will then address on the recovery side. I just had this conversation with someone yesterday, and we were talking about our program, and they're an organization that could send people to our program, and they were hesitant because of our faith stance. And I said, look, you're either going to send people before the bottom falls out or after, but they're coming. So you have to decide what you're going to do. And I think really it is two things. There are people we're trying to prevent from going down this path, in the abortion world. But then there are those who are going down that path. They're there. And we can't just not help them. And I really appreciate that. I think it's all of it. I don't think it's any one of those things. But really appreciate you. Man, the work that you're doing is so important. You know this, but thank you for what you're doing and your staff and all of the folks who are involved in this. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll talk again, but thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for giving me a voice and being willing to listen. And thank you again, my heart with, we owe you guys such a deep debt of gratitude that I don't know if people really understand what those who walk into combat do for us and the world. And so I'm so grateful, and I'm so grateful that you took your hurt and your trauma and you're helping others on the other side, because there is trauma when you help people. And when you walk into a firefight, there's going to be trauma. And so I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful for you being willing to listen and give this movement and what people are doing every single day at ground level a voice, because there's so much going on in the world and it gets lost in that. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I really do.
Well, thank you, Leslie. I appreciate you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too. Very grateful for that conversation and for the work that Leslie's involved in and so many others in her space, really just helping, ministering, serving those who are in really a potentially life-altering crisis. And man, when we think about what's at stake here, it is lives that are at stake. Every woman who walks through their door asking for help, asking for direction. These are life and death conversations that they're having. And I'm so grateful for the folks who are involved in this. And man, very grateful for that conversation. I know that was a help to me, and I trust that it was a help to you. Share this out with someone that you know that may be struggling as well. Take some time later on to go over to Life Audio, lifeaudio.com. That's where you will find not only this podcast, but other great podcasts, wonderful hosts there, great content, all from a faith perspective that I know can be a help to you. So please check that out at lifeaudio.com. Look forward to sharing next week's episode with you. But until then, I will remind you, like I do every week, when the bullets are flying your direction, when the world around you seems to be falling apart, you only have two options. You can stay where you are and die. You can make that decision, or you can do the better thing and march. So the question is this: what are you going to do? Thank you, and we'll talk to you next time.